Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting some urgent legal breaking news from the Supreme Court as it relates to the unfortunate SNAP payments. The SNAP payments that are being unfortunately blocked by the Trump administration. Let's get into that reporting, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, the article is titled, Supreme Court Extends Order Blocking Full SNAP Payments with Shutdown Potentially Near an End. Ladies and gentlemen, but there is no guarantee that the shutdown can end. Is going to end. Right now, we are currently in our 42nd day of the Republican-led shutdown. Ladies and gentlemen, the article is titled, reads, The Supreme Court on Tuesday, today, ladies and gentlemen, extended an order blocking full SNAP payments or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or the Anti-Hunger Program or Food Stamp Program. Ladies and gentlemen, amid signals at that the government shutdown could soon end and food aid payments resume. The order keeps in place at least for a few more days a chaotic situation. People who depend on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program to feed their families in some states have received their full monthly allocations, while others have received nothing. The order will expire just before midnight Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, honestly, I just don't see why the Supreme Court is giving in to this piece of shit. Ladies and gentlemen, the article continues. The Senate has approved a bill to end the shutdown, and the House of Representatives could vote on it as early as Wednesday, which is tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. However, there is no guarantee that the bill passes the House. Hopefully, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't, because if it does, then everyone and their then everyone's premiums and the costs of healthcare will go skyrocketing, which is unfortunate, ladies and gentlemen, and illegal. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the article continues. Reopening the government could restart the program that helps 42 million Americans buy groceries, but it's not clear how quickly the full payments would resume. Ladies and gentlemen, again, there's no guarantee that the payments will resume quickly, let alone that the bill will pass the House. Ladies and gentlemen, Here we go. The justices chose what is effectively the path of least resistance, anticipating the federal government shutdown. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, the GOP federal government shutdown, because all Republicans run the government. The Democrats don't run anything. Will end soon while avoiding any substantive legal ruling about whether lower court orders to keep full payments flowing during the shutdown are correct. Beneficiaries in some states have received their full monthly allocations, while others, they have received nothing. Some states have issued partial payments. How quickly SNAP benefits could reach recipients if the government reopens would vary by state. The states, but states and advocates say that, that it's easier to make full payments quickly than partial ones. Caroline Vega, a policy analysis at the advocacy group Share Our Strength, also said there could be some technical challenges for states to have issued partial benefits to send out the remaining amount. Ladies and gentlemen, an urgent need for beneficiaries. In Pennsylvania, full November benefits went out to some people on Friday. But Jim Milliard, Malliard, Malliard, ladies and gentlemen, 41 of Franklin, said he has not received anything by Monday. Had not received anything by Monday, ladies and gentlemen. Milliard is a full-time caretaker for his wife, who is blind and has several strokes. And has had several strokes this year, and his teenage daughter, who suffered severe medical complications from surgery last year. That stress has only been compounded by the pause in the $350 monthly SNAP payment he previously received for himself, his wife, and daughter. He said he is down to $10 in his account and is relying on what's left in the pantry, mostly rice and ramen. Quote, it's kind of been a lot of late nights making sure I had everything down to the penny to make sure I was right. Unquote, Milliard said, quote, to say anxiety has been my issue for the last 2 weeks, is putting it mildly. Unquote. The political wrangling in Washington has shocked many Americans, and some have been moved to help. Quote, I figured that I've spent money on dumber stuff than trying to feed other people during a manufactured famine. Unquote, said Ashley Oxenford, a teacher who set out a, quote, little food pantry, unquote, in her front yard this week for vulnerable neighbors in Carthage, New York. Ladies and gentlemen, SNAP has been the center of an intense fight in court. The Trump administration chose to cut off funding after October due to the shutdown. That decision sparked lawsuits and a string of swift and contradictory judicial rulings that deal with government power and food access for some 42 million Americans. The administration went along with two rulings on October 30 by judges who said the government must provide at least partial funding for SNAP. It eventually said recipients would get up to 65% of their regular benefits, but it balked last week when one of the judges said it must fund the program fully for November, when it, even if that means digging into funds the government said need to be maintained in case of emergencies elsewhere. Are you effing kidding me, ladies and gentlemen? Emergencies elsewhere when this supposedly is not an emergency. It is an emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, the article by Fox 12 continues. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed to pause that order. An appeals court said Monday that full funding should resume, and that requirement was set to kick in Tuesday night before the top court extended the order blocking full SNAP benefits. I am completely disappointed in the Supreme Court right now, ladies and gentlemen. Congressional talks about reopening government. The U.S. Senate on Monday passed legislation to open the federal government with a plan that would include replenishing SNAP funds. Ladies and gentlemen, with that note, I will add all my editorial addition, ladies and gentlemen, that, of course, that this plan to reopen the federal government is bullcrap, because a bunch of people's healthcare premiums, etc., are going to go skyrocketing. And that is going to be is a major downfall for the Republican Party. Not the Democrats, because the Republicans run the government. They run the House, they run the Senate, and they run the presidency, ladies and gentlemen. The article continues. Speaker Mike Johnson told members of the House to return to Washington to consider the deal a small group of Senate Democrats made with Republicans. President Trump has not said whether he would sign it if it reaches his desk, but told reporters at the White House on Sunday that it looks like we're getting close to the shutdown ending. Still, the Trump administration said in a Supreme Court filing Monday that it shouldn't be up to the courts. Yes, it should, because it's called judicial review, you dumb nut. This quote by Solicitor General John Sauer. The answer to this crisis is not for federal courts to reallocate resources without lawful authority. But here's the thing, John Sauer. I figured you would know this because you are supposedly a top lawyer, even though I don't think you really are a lawyer at all. I figured you would know this, but I'm not surprised that you don't know it. Of course, I just figured you would know it, but obviously you don't, because look who you're representing, a criminal. Ladies and gentlemen, the article continues. Said in the papers, quote, the only way to end this crisis, which the executive is adamant to end, is for Congress to reopen the government, unquote. But yet again, ladies and gentlemen, there's no guarantee that this bill will pass the House. Yet again, even if it does, then again, it won't. There's no guarantee that it will, and the premiums of everybody's healthcare, mine, yours, every 42 million 41 other million American, their premiums on their healthcare insurance will go skyrocketing. The coalition of cities and nonprofit groups who challenged the SNAP pause said in a court filing Tuesday that the Department of Agriculture, which administers SNAP, is to blame for the confusion. The chaos was sown by the USDA's delay and interest agents. That's INTRANSIGENCE. Ladies and gentlemen, in case the word comes up misspelled as incorrectly in the reporting transcripts. Unquote, they said, quote, not by the district court's efforts to mitigate that chaos and the harm it has inflicted on families who need food. Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that is going to do it for this legal breaking reporting video analysis update. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting and video analysis update, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about. More to come soon.